All right, so today we're going to dive into a chapter from the Quran called Surah al-Anfal. Now, the name translates to the spoils of war, so you'd think it's just about, the loot you get after a battle. But what starts as this really practical, almost materialistic argument blossoms into this incredible guide on what it means to have faith, how to handle conflict, and what it takes to build a real community. It's amazing how a simple dispute over stuff becomes a timeless spiritual lesson.
So, picture this. The chapter kicks off with a very human, very messy problem. A major battle has just been won, and suddenly the early Muslim community is arguing over the spoils. I mean, who gets what? Who deserves the bigger share? It's a raw, unfiltered dispute about fairness, rights, and who really pulled their weight in the fight.
And then, boom, the answer comes down and it just completely flips the script. It says the spoils don't really belong to any one person or group based on who fought the hardest. Nope. The ultimate authority over all of it belongs to God and His messenger. This one declaration just pivots the entire conversation away from what's mine to a much, much bigger lesson. So let's start there. Section 1, a question about spoils. We're going to look at how this very real, very tangible disagreement over wealth becomes the gateway to the whole chapter's spiritual core.
The context here is absolutely crucial. This isn't some abstract debate in a classroom. This is a real-world problem, happening moments after a life-or-death struggle. These people, who were just fighting side by side as comrades, are now bickering over material goods. And it's this exact moment of friction that becomes the perfect teaching opportunity to redirect everyone's focus from the temporary to the eternal. And this leads us right into Section 2, the anatomy of faith. This is where things get really interesting because the text does something so unexpected. Instead of just laying out the rules for dividing the loot, it pivots. It basically says, hold on, before we talk about what you get, let's talk about who you're supposed to be. It first defines the character of a true believer.
So who are these true believers? Well, the text lays out 5 key qualities. And what's so fascinating is that it's this blend of the internal and the external. It's about what you feel inside, like your heart trembling or your faith growing, but it's also about what you do, praying, giving to others. Faith here isn't just a thought or a feeling. It's the whole package. It's a complete state of being.
And here's the kicker. Before that initial argument over the spoils even gets settled, the text introduces a totally different kind of reward. It says the ultimate prize isn't gold or camels. It's something infinitely greater, a high spiritual rank with God, forgiveness, and a noble provision. The focus is deliberately yanked away from the stuff you can hold in your hand to the stuff that lasts forever.
This brings us to the battle itself. Section 3, victory and divine aid. And here we find this really compelling tension between what the believers wanted to do and what God actually had in store for them. You can just feel the tension here, right? The believers, being human, were looking at the easier prize. There was this merchant caravan, not heavily guarded. It seemed like a low-risk, high-reward situation. But God's plan was completely different. It was for them to face the powerful, fully armed military force. And why? The text says it was to make the truth undeniable, to create this decisive moment that would settle things once and for all. So when that showdown actually happens, the text is crystal clear. The victory didn't come from their numbers or their strategy alone, not even close. It was a result of direct, divine intervention. 1,000, that's the number. The text says that when they cried out for help, God sent 1,000 angels to reinforce them. But it's interesting, this wasn't just about having more soldiers. It was described as good tidings, something to calm their hearts and drive home the point that real victory only comes from God. And the support wasn't only military, it was psychological, even environmental. A sense of calm, like a peaceful slumber, was sent over them to make them feel secure. And then rain fell, not only to purify them, but on a practical level, it firmed up the sand, giving them a solid place to stand their ground.
This verse, wow, it might be the most powerful summary of this whole idea. It's saying point blank that even your own actions, the fighting, the act of throwing dust at the enemy, it was all empowered and guided by God. It just completely removes human ego from the victory equation. It's all God.
Okay, so with the source of victory established as being divine, the surah then lays out a very clear code of conduct for how believers should act on the battlefield. That's Section 4, the rules of conflict.
These instructions are just a fantastic mix of military discipline and spiritual focus. I mean, be firm and persevere, any general would tell their troops that. But woven right in are commands to remember God, to obey God, and, this one is huge, do not dispute with one another. The warning is clear as day. If you start fighting amongst yourselves, you'll fail. Unity isn't just a nice idea, it's a strategic imperative.
And let me tell you, the text is incredibly stern about running away. Fleeing the fight is framed as a major sin, something that brings down divine anger. The only time it's okay is for a tactical maneuver, like falling back to regroup with another unit. Otherwise, you stand your ground. Steadfastness is non-negotiable.
All right, from here, the surah zooms out. We move beyond the battlefield to the bigger picture of how to govern a community. This is Section 5, Community, Wealth, and Treaties. And this is where we finally get the answer to that first question about the spoils.
So here it is, the specific ruling. 1/5, or 20%, is set aside for a public treasury. Think of it as a social welfare fund for the state, for taking care of relatives, orphans, the poor, and travelers. The other 80% is distributed among the fighters themselves, so it's a system designed to both reward the soldiers and create a safety net for the whole community.
The guidance on foreign policy is just as nuanced. On one hand, the command is clear. If the enemy wants peace, you lean into peace too. You accept it. But this is not a naive command. On the other hand, if you have good reason to fear betrayal, you're told to end the treaty. But you have to do it openly so that both sides know where they stand. No sneak attacks, no treachery.
And this all connects to the idea of deterrence. The surah says, look, you need to build up your strength as much as you can. But the goal isn't just to be aggressive, it's to be so strong that potential enemies are deterred from even thinking about attacking you. Military readiness is framed as a tool for keeping the peace.
And finally, our last section, the enduring triumph. This is where the surah ties everything together, defining the kind of community that's built through all these trials, and reaffirming what that ultimate spiritual reward really is.
So the text points to two core groups. You have the Muhajirun, the immigrants who left their homes and everything they knew for their faith, and then you have the Ansar, the helpers in the new city, who took them in. And the surah declares that these two groups are true allies, protectors of one another. They formed a new kind of family, based not on blood, but on shared faith and struggle.
And this brings us right back to the beginning. The chapter ends by repeating that powerful phrase, "Those are the believers, truly." But now, after everything that's been discussed, the definition of a true believer is so much richer. It's not just about inner piety anymore. It's about being steadfast in a crisis, being just with wealth, and having unwavering support for your community. And that reward is reaffirmed one last time, forgiveness and a noble provision from God.
And so that leaves us with a big, important question to think about. These principles on leadership, wealth, and ethics were forged in the heat of 7th century Arabia. So how do they resonate with us today? In our modern world of global politics and complex economies, what does it mean to balance faith with pragmatism, or personal gain with the good of the community? What lessons about preparing for conflict while always being ready for peace still hold true? What endures from this ancient text? That's the challenge for us to consider.